Chayei Sarah, the life of Sarah. The title of this week's Parsha is somewhat misleading because this week we do not read in the Torah about Sarah's life. Instead, we read about her death and her burial at Me'arat HaMachpelah in Hebron. The life of our first matriarch is not the focus of the Parsha. However, the life of our second matriarch, Rivkah, does occupy a large portion of the narrative. Genesis 24, Bereshit, Parakaf Daled, begins with Abraham's charge to his servant, saying, Ki el artzi ve'el moladeti telech, ve'lakachta isha livni liyitzchak. To my land and to my birthplace you shall go, and you shall take a wife for my son, for Isaac. So the servant, who is known in the Midrash as Eliezer, travels to Aram Naharaim on his matchmaking mission. To determine which woman shall be the one, Eliezer devises a test. He prays to Hashem, saying, Let it be that the young woman to whom I say, Hatina chadech ve'eshteh, tip down your jug that I may drink, if she says, Shteh, v'gam gemalecha ashkeh, drink, and your camels I also shall provide water, it is that woman that you have marked for Yitzchak as a wife, as his beshert. Sure enough, when Rivkah comes to the well, she says, Shteh Adoni, drink, my lord. And then after a very suspense-filled moment, after she rushes her kishkes out to get water for Eliezer, she says, Gam ligmalecha eshav. For your camels also I shall draw water until they drink their fill. Rivkah has passed the test. In fact, Rivkah exceeds Eliezer's expectations. According to Robert Alter, Rivkah's actions are nearly Homeric. During this scene at the Be'er, at the well, Rivkah is the subject of over 10 action verbs. She is a whirl of continuous activity. Vatimaher, vatored, vatashkeu, vatichal, vatimaher again, vatiar, vatarot, vatishav. She goes down to the well, she draws water, fills the pitcher, pours, gives drink, schleps back and forth to provide drink for Eliezer and for his 10 thirsty camels. And one can only imagine how much water 10 camels drink. Rivkah would have had to be a non-stop blur of motion in order to carry all of this water from the well in her single jug. In this scene, Rivkah emerges as extremely active, industrious, tireless, and hospitable. She is the very essence of chesed, of loving kindness. As we know, Eliezer's mission is successful. He returns home to the land of Canaan with a wife for Isaac. And as the text tells us, Vayiviyeha Yitzchak ha'ohela Sarah imo. Isaac brought her, Rebecca, into the tent of Sarah, his mother. Rashi tells us in his commentary that we should read the verse as follows. Yitzchak brought Rivkah into the tent because she was like Sarah, his mother. She resembled her. She was a replica, sort of, close replica. V'naset dugmat Sarah imam. Midrash Hagadol teaches us shahayu ma'aseha domim l'ma'aseh Sarah, that her deeds, Rivkah's deeds, were similar to Sarah's deeds. Midrash Rabbah in Bereshit Rabbah, provides several examples of the similarity between the deeds of Rivkah and Sarah. Rashi cites some of them. Rashi says, Shekol zman shesara kayemet haya ner zaluk me'erev Shabbat la'erev Shabbat. The entire time that Sarah was in existence, the entire time Sarah was alive, a candle was lit in her tent from Erev Shabbat, from Friday before Shabbos, all the way to the next Erev Shabbat. Uvracha mitzuya ba'isa, and there was blessing that could be found in her dough that she used for challah. Ve'anan kashor al ha'ohel, and there was a protective cloud signifying God's presence attached to the tent. Umisha meta pasku. But when Sarah died, all three of these miraculous conditions, all three of these sources of blessing in Avram and Sarah's tent ceased. They were no more. Ukishabat Rivkah chazru. But when Rivkah entered into that tent, all three of these miraculous conditions continued. All three of these miracles recurred. Midrash Rabbah also says, Kol yamim shahayta Sarah kayemet, hayu daltoteha petuchot lervacha. All of the days that Sarah was in existence, all of the days of Sarah's life, her doors were open to wideness. Her doors were wide open. She was very hospitable. People always knew they would be welcome in that tent. V'kevan shemetva Sarah, when Sarah died, paska ota haravacha. When Sarah died, all of that openness stopped. V'kevan shebat Rivkah, but when Rivkah came along, chazra ota haravacha. When Rivkah came along, all of this openness returned to the tent. Those doors were wide open during the days of Sarah to guests. At her death, no more guests. When Rivkah came in to essentially take the place of or follow in the footsteps of her mother-in-law, that openness returned. Just as Sarah was hospitable and open-handed and open-hearted to strangers, so too was Rivkah. The life of Rivkah is reminiscent of the life of Sarah. Perhaps the title of this parsha, Chayei Sarah, is fitting after all. From the midrashim that link Rivkah and Sarah, we learn that we should also find ways to engage in acts of chesed, opening up our hearts and our homes to strangers, as well as to family and friends and other guests. A friend of mine told me the following story. It's a story of one of her congregants at her shul. Cheryl's 60-year-old father died after a long bout with cancer. The news of Cheryl's father's death was publicized in her synagogue, but there weren't any concerted efforts made to do anything for Cheryl's family during the week of Shiva, because not many people knew Cheryl and her family. They were relatively new members of the community. No one delivered meals to this family during the week of Shiva because not that many people knew the family. Cheryl was a single mother raising her children on her own. She used to spend 2.5 hours a day schlepping her children back and forth to their day school. And she spent most of the past year, the year before her father's death, schlepping tirelessly to visit him, to take care of him. And although Cheryl's Homeric activism is reminiscent of Rivkah, her new synagogue community didn't follow Rivkah's example. If only the members of Cheryl's shul had read this week's Torah portion and the midrashim that link Sarah to Rivkah, then they might have realized that delivering meals to a person you don't know should be done. It's a mitzvah. It's not any more difficult, or should not be any more difficult, than Sarah's spontaneous outpouring of hospitality for 3 unexpected guests, and should not be any more difficult than Rivkah's schlepping water to and from the well for Eliezer's 10 thirsty camels. I'd like to contrast Cheryl's story with my story, a story that took place over 18 and a half years ago, when I went into postpartum septic shock after giving birth to my 3rd child, whose name happens to be Rivkah. At the time, Adi and I were very active members of our shul, and within the greater Philadelphia Jewish community as well, not just in the synagogue. And there was an outpouring of support when I was hospitalized with septic pelvic thrombophlebitis. Can't pronounce that, but I had it. Adi had to take care of our newborn, as well as our 2 older kids who weren't that much older, Ariel and Eva. He had to do this on his own because our parents didn't live nearby. Every day, dozens of people came to visit me in the hospital with flowers, chocolate, love chocolate, lots of other goodies. Every day, people schlepped my kids to and from school and to their extracurricular activities. Every day, people brought meals for my family, kid-friendly ones for Ariel and Eva, and more adult-appropriate meals for Adi. And not just for the 10 days I was in the hospital, also for over a month afterwards. Ein omer ve'ein devarim. There are no words to express how grateful and how touched Adi and I were, how appreciative we were of the acts of chesed that others in our Jewish community, what they did to help us out during this difficult time. I will never forget their kindness. But it just doesn't seem fair that our family received so much when Cheryl's family received so little in their community, in their time of need. People shouldn't just act in a Sarah-like or Rivkah-like manner towards those people that they know in the community. We shouldn't just help our friends, and we shouldn't just help others when it's convenient for us. Like Sarah and like Rivkah, we should also extend ourselves to strangers, even when it's inconvenient for us. The story of Rivkah is also the story of Sarah. And the stories of Rivkah and Sarah should also be our story. Ken Yehi Ratzon. Shabbat Shalom.